So understanding yourself and self-assessing gives you the confidence to say, you know what, this probably isn't me.
Hello to you. It's Relationships at Work, your leadership guide to helping you build workplace connection, improve culture, and avoid blind spots. I'm your host, Russel Lolacher, a communications and leadership expert with a couple of successful decades in both those areas. Whole heap of curiosity, just like yourself. That's why you're listening to the show on how we can make the workplace a better place. Dysfunctional workplaces. Have you worked at any? Have you have it swirled around you in its toxicity? And there's levels of toxicity when it comes to dysfunction, because maybe it's just not producing like you want. And that's not necessarily toxic, but I know there's a spectrum when it comes to talking about dysfunctional workplaces. What I don't think we talk enough about, though, is our role in those dysfunctional workplaces. Because as leaders, we have a role to play. Even if we don't see it, even if we don't understand it, if we're good leaders, we have to assume we have some contribution in some way. Maybe it's not direct, maybe it's not obvious, but there's always something we could be doing better. There's always something we could tweak. As good leaders, as we both understand, we know that there's always something better we can do. There's always some effort we can make. But we don't know if we don't know, right? My guest today is going to help us dig a little deeper into that, because self-assessment, self-awareness, situational awareness, they're cornerstones of this show. And he really wants to connect the dots, my guest that is, between understanding us and understanding our role in a dysfunctional workplace and how we can be better in improving these situations. I think that's really important because, like I said, there is a role for us to play. We wouldn't be leaders otherwise, would we? Okay. Let's dig into it. Let's get to know ourselves a little bit better, and let's see how we can help turn the corner on some of these dysfunctional workplaces. Hold on. And on the show today, we have Eric Charran, and here is why he is awesome. He's an author, speaker, and executive director and head of product for data at Intuit. He's also the founder and CEO of Vulcan Collective, offering executive level guidance on AI, data infrastructure, and platform architecture. Before that, he was the chief architect for Microsoft. And he's an author, like I said before. And here's the book we're going to be talking a little bit about today, which is Have You Ever Had a Boss That ... question mark. I'm very specific in my wording here, Eric. Succeeding in a dysfunctional workplace. Welcome to the show, sir.
Russell, thanks for having me on.
It's funny reading your bio and getting a little digging into your background a bit. I'm like, how techie is this conversation going to be? But happy to know that we're not, even though that's a bit of my background as well, is just overseeing technical products and so forth. But I'm really curious about self-assessing, especially in an organization that may not be working as well as it should. But before we get to all of that, I have to ask you the question, sir, that I ask all of my guests, which is, what is your best or worst employee experience?
Yeah, I'd love to answer both of those, but maybe I'll just pick on the more challenging one. And so what I think, and actually one of the things that partially inspired me just kind of trying to write down everything I've learned was a recent experience that I had with a VP at one of the organizations I worked at. And this is an individual, like most of the individuals and the behaviors that I write about in the book, it's the person's fantastic. It's just that they have the wrong tools in their toolbox. And so instead of, taking the time to try to be self-aware, which is a skill in and of itself, this individual kind of doubled down and said that, nope, these are the tools that I've been given. These are the tools that are in my box. I'm not interested in swapping out these tools. And so this is the way it's going to be. So there are instances, and in fact, they inspired one of the archetypes that I write about in the book, which was the emergency broadcaster. So in this scenario, the emergency broadcaster is somebody that doesn't necessarily do a great job of preparing and being aware of what's happening from a day-to-day perspective. And it's largely because they are kind of constantly in defense mode. There's so many demands on their time. Inbox has thousands of unread messages, Slacks are piling up, and the demands on their time is considerable. They just haven't figured out a system on how to work through those things. And as a result, only the emergencies brought, piled to the top. When emergencies happen, they may not be emergencies for everybody else. And it turns out in this instance, they weren't. So myself and a couple other VPs at the time were consistently under siege where there were these false proclamations of the sky is falling. And in many instances, we were like, "Hey, no, no, it's not falling. It's okay. We told you last week, and it was in your inbox, and we slacked you. Here's the slide deck." So this instance was one of those instances in which, we were all, some of us were working out, some of us were dropping kids off at daycare, some of us were getting on and off the subways, balancing phones and coffee cups, and then this emergency meeting happens, 7:30 a.m. Everybody get on this call because the managing vice president knew every VP has a packed day, but when's the one time that you're likely not busy? It's when you're commuting. So 7:30 a.m., I know everybody can be on. And we began to go through, and people, you're screaming kids in the background, people dropping phones, shaky Zooms, and we're all just, commiserating in the background about how this is such a work-life balance intrusion for no good reason. It's, emergencies happen, but when they are not emergencies for everybody else except your leader, and even though they've been briefed, that's the real challenge. And so that in and of itself, you're like, well, hey, Russell, you might say, well, that's not too terrible. Well, it kept happening. It was chronic. And it wasn't until I kind of dug into and figured out what the motivation was. What was the reasons why they were indexing on this tool of the 7:30 a.m. surprise meeting? Why were they doing that? That was what really kind of led me to think about, well, not only do I have the opportunity to deal with this differently, I can manage upward. I can talk to this person about what this tool in their toolbox does to the rest of the team and how we can avoid it in the future.
Fair comment. I appreciate that you in your book call them bosses and not leaders. I appreciate that because we label a lot of people in their roles leaders because of where they sit in the company, but that's management. That's not leadership. So I
Mhm.
really appreciate that you made that clarification in your book. What impact does that have on mental health for you? Because I mean, having him have that meeting at 7:30 once, twice, this is red flags. This is not, you know, regular operating, but then it became that way. So
Yeah.
suddenly a very full day for you becomes far more full. It's bleeding into your private, time with family and so forth. So what was the impact to you from a mental standpoint?
Yeah. Great question. It creates this sense of foreboding and dread. It's
Mm.
almost like at the end of the day, and many executives probably do the same thing. At the end of your day, 6 p.m. or so, whenever you wind up, you tend to take a break, go get dinner, spend time with the family. And then maybe around, for me, it's like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I kind of just stack up what I'm going to be doing the next day so I can prepare. And then all of a sudden you see sometimes while you're looking at your calendar, it pops up 7:30 a.m. meeting. And you're just like, ugh. And so it creates this sense of dread, this sense of foreboding, this sense of, gosh, if I'm not going to attend this. So it's like a cycle. It's like, I'm not going to attend that. That just showed up. And if I give in to attending these last minute meetings, I'm teaching my manager that these are okay, that I'm going to show up. So I'm not going to show up. And then maybe around 6 a.m. the next morning, you take a second look at your calendar as you're getting up to go work out. And you're like, well, it looks like everybody else accepted. If I don't show up, then I'm going to be the one missing out. All right. Well, now I probably need to hop on this. I wasn't planning on it, but gosh, I now need to arrange my whole gym schedule in the morning. I got to figure out how I can get people, the kids to school. Maybe I can get them a little earlier so they're not screaming in the background. So it's a infringement upon kind of like there's this saying I love called protect your peace. And it's
Right.
an infringement on the ability to do that. And, again, I'm not a clinician, even though I talk a lot about how the power of choosing happiness and a positive mental attitude in the book about that as ingredients to help you manage upward. It's something that does have an impact until you learn how to kind of grapple with it.
Hey, if you're enjoying the insights from our guests, you'll love our Raw Notes newsletter. It's packed with guest takeaways, the resources that inspire them, and my own tips on how we as leaders can be better humans for the humans that we're responsible for. Go to relationshipsatworkshow.com and subscribe now and help the workplace be more human.
It's also sad for me to hear that you were surrounded by people that also weren't demonstrating leadership by normalizing dysfunction because they all
Mhm.
accepted it. So they're
Yes,
perpetuating a dysfunctional workplace and saying, well, that should be the norm because of somebody's title, because
that's right.
of the influence they have over them. So that breaks my heart because they're part of the problem and don't see it as such. And then they're dragging you in with them, and it just becomes a bigger problem, which leads me to my first question as we get into our topic today, which is
Mhm.
self-assessment during dysfunction and why we would even need to do that. So first, I like to define things. Eric, how would you define a dysfunctional workplace? Because we give examples all the time, but we don't always actually define what we're talking about.
It's a good question. I think if I look at it through a leadership perspective, if I'm in the C level or the VP level, there's a couple lenses that I look at it through. Dysfunction could mean that we're actually delivering results, but we're rewarding the wrong thing. We're building the wrong culture. We're achieving results by leaving bodies in the street behind us. We are not actually creating or fostering a place where people want to work, get energy from work. The other scenario is from a leadership perspective is, hey, we're rewarding the wrong thing. It's amazing to me, Russell, how many organizations that I've been a part of, how many teams I've been a part of reward busyness instead of actual outcomes. So the idea is if you're busy, your calendar's booked, you're running from conference to meetings to conference rooms, leadership oftentimes looks at you or bosses might say, hey, that person's seems to be in demand. They're probably exceeding their expectations. They're always in demand. They're always busy instead of looking at the actual outcomes. And in my leadership journey, I've realized that I want people less busy. I want people to continually optimize to deliver on their accountabilities, but have what I call discretionary professional energy that they can use to innovate in new things, help us move past competitors, do things that bring them energy and that have tangible, deliverable results within the enterprise. The other element is toxicity, which is it's a common word. It makes maybe old timers, Gen Xers like me, kind of groan because it might be overused, but it's real. So we didn't have when I was coming up, and we didn't have words like you know um, you know bring your whole self to work or psychological safety. Those weren't concepts. You just took it and you persevered. You built that scar tissue and you pushed on. We now know how harmful that is and how that people don't have to take. So to me, that's what dysfunction is. It's facilitating some of these negative, impactful elements, rewarding the wrong thing, building the wrong culture, achieving things, but potentially doing it not in the best or most healthy way.
I like that you balanced it between the two areas of function and feeling. To be blunt,
Mhm.
to just stick to my alliteration today, Eric. Um, I saying the word dysfunction, people immediately go to productivity. It is not producing. I'm like,
Mhm.
no, that's not what we're talking about. Because there's some, to our point as we kicked off, mental health ramifications, burnout, people leaving. We're talking
Mhm.
about retention. We're talking like there are so many aspects to a dysfunctional workplace. The problem is when those with power see this as and again to your point, rewarding performative, not performance.
R-
And it's the checkbox leadership that gets rewarded because you delivered this number. I'm like, but how did they deliver the number?
Yes.
But what's the wreckage that allowed you to get to that number? Is it the same team or did 90% of them quit because they hate you? Like there is so much more to dig into. And I think we stick too much on the productivity side of things. I once had a conversation with someone, they illustrated somebody was a great leader. And I asked them because I knew they weren't. And they're like,
Mhm.
because they get me what I want when I want it. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then you have no idea what a leader is.
Right.
But that's how you're defining it.
You're 100% right, and the how element is so important. I worked for Microsoft for a number of years, and I was there for the cultural transition that happened when we changed leaders in 2014. So it was the end of one era and the beginning of another one. And I think everybody's seen that GIF or that image online with Microsoft with a bunch of product teams with guns pointing at each other. There was a street fight culture. It
Right.
was who can actually achieve this goal the best and the fastest. Come to the conference room. you go, and I'll pick the best one. Like that was the street fight culture at the time. And when our new leader came in, Satya Nadella, he actually called all the senior leaders together because his focus was changing that culture. He gave us all a book to read called The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. And I said, I'm Eric Charran. I have a growth mindset. I don't need to read this until was going to go spend time with him. And they're like, make sure you read that book. So I read it on the plane out. And I'm like, the first 20 pages changed my life. So it became less, even our performance management, it became less of a what you achieved and but it became what did you achieve and how did you achieve it? How
Yeah.
did you work with others? How did you bring people along? And I think that was ultimately an instrumental pivot point for the company.
They're both equally important. We can't weigh one over the other because the other will suffer.
Yeah.
But how do you know you're in a dysfunctional workplace versus I just had a bad week? And is it different based on a team versus the whole organization?
That's a great question. So one of the elements of wisdom that I learned from the relationship that I managed to have with Satya, given the few times that I had a chance to spend time with him, is people don't quit organizations; they quit managers. And having that realization means that it's ultimately your responsibility as a leader to make sure that you don't actually have a series of team members that are constantly having bad weeks, week after week after week after week. Everyone has a bad day. Everyone has a bad week where things don't go the way you want them to. The question is whether or not your leadership and your bosses will support you and say, listen, you goofed up, but together we'll get through it. So if they're a coach versus somebody doesn't have the best tools in their toolbox, gosh, this was a big miss. Really disappointed. Make sure that you do better next time. Same outcome, different messages, different ways in which you bring the best out in people. And I think the way that you kind of have that self-awareness and assess is it happening chronically? Can I count on the number of times that this has happened? And is it likely to change? And what can I do to help it change? And if the answers are nothing, and sometimes it is, sometimes you try your best to change. You manage upward, you use some of the techniques I have in the book, but knowing your worth is really what's important for you to say, listen, all right, it's time for me to ride off. I can't continue putting more energy after bad in this chronically terrible situation.
Before we get into the whole self-reflection, self-assessment side of things, I did want to ask why a lot of leaders never seem to see themselves as part of the problem. Because even if it's directly and obviously somebody else did the thing, the leader, if they are a leader, should understand that they may be influence environments. They may be influencing. There's always something. And yet there's always this, well, go figure it out. I'll lead over here. You go figure it out, which just perpetuates dysfunction. So it's kind of curious as to why you think that continues to be a problem.
Well, that's a great question. The only thing I can think of is if I put myself in a leader's shoes who obviously it's difficult to say that any one person is the problem, and because everybody has responsibility, but ultimately leaders control resources and establish culture. And those are the things that the cultural establishment is really many times the challenge. I think maybe if I were to step into a leader's that believed that they're not part of the problem or it doesn't even occur to them is that the organization hired me here. They pay me pretty decently. I've been given this responsibility, meaning that I earned it. And as a result, the organization believes that I'm here doing the right things and I'm going to use every tool that I know how in order to get things done. And as a result, if things aren't getting done, it can't be me. It's got to be the people that are underneath me. And I need better people. I need better resources. I need more resources. I need more expertise. So that haze of infallibility, I think, is probably rewarded or gifted to them by the fact that they were given the role. Either they were promoted into it, or they were hired or recruited into it and sought after. And as a result, you kind of get that perception of infallibility.
Breaks my heart. So let's get into the self-assessment side of things. What is the role of self-assessment, specifically as it pertains to diagnosing dysfunction? Basically, why should we?
I think in order to master a situation, you have to first master yourself and really understand how things are impacting and affecting you. And I think I've kind of had to develop this muscle over time. There are much, much better ways to do it than going through trauma like I did. or maybe like a lot of our listeners are doing. But the more you can really understand where your energy comes from, what motivates you, what you like and don't like, and what your worth is, it gives you kind of like a power. So in many of the archetypes and many of these bad behaviors that I talk about in the book, a lot of people feel that, number one, depending on where you are in your career, earlier in career, people tend to feel that it's directed at them, and I am deficient somehow. Uh, I'm new here. I just graduated my undergrad. This is my first professional gig, and I'm being yelled at, screamed at, um, or maybe iced out or neglected, or I'm on the outside. I can't get in. It must be me. I must be doing something wrong. Maybe this career isn't for me. Maybe I didn't really go choose the right school. Whatever. All the self doubt kind of creeps in. Um, and then when you're mid in career, you're kind of like, well, hey, this is just the way that it is. This is the grind. I just have to put up with this and I have to deal with it until one day I'm in that role. And what you don't realize is that you're learning from your leader. That's these bad behaviors. That's what the organization values because they keep promoting people that have these bad behaviors. So I must now adopt these bad behaviors. So these things kind of persist generationally almost, and they oftentimes persist in silence when nobody has the courage to speak up and say, you know what, your behaviors in this way are impacting us negatively. And it's not only bringing down the team, but it's bringing down results and productivity. And here's what I think we can do next. So, understanding yourself and self assessing gives you the confidence to say, you know what, this probably isn't me. And sure, nobody's perfect, but maybe it's not just me. Maybe if I look around and take a lens across the entire team, how many other people are actually experiencing some of these issues and some of these behaviors? So if it's not me, then there's only really one thing that it can be, which is the behavior. Again, it's I try to in the book separate the individual from the behavior. The behavior is really what we want to change, and it's entirely possible if you're of the mindset that I am not powerless under my manager. I can actually manage upwards and make suggestions and ask questions and lead them down paths and educate them because I know who I am. I know that I've got these behaviors and I understand their motivations. And I've assessed myself and I can actually now take control of this scenario.
I do know a lot of people that get frustrated about having to manage up because they're like, you make more money than me. Why am I having to manage you? You should just be a better leader. Like, aren't you
Yeah.
hired to do the job to lead me? Aren't you supposed to be my mentor and model the behavior that I want? And yet I have to babysit you or I have to hold your hand through something because you can't handle critical information.
Mhm.
You can't handle your calendar. So I always find that interesting because I'm like, I get managing up and I get the value of it, but I also see the flip side of it going, we have an ecosystem problem when it comes to leadership that we allow this behavior to happen. And then we're asking too much of our middle management
Yeah.
to have to manage up, which just hurts and makes a dysfunctional organization.
Yeah, there's a couple of great points that you brought up there. Middle management is largely underserved in terms of leadership training. They give a lot of support to people like me and people in my peers who are managing, hundreds and maybe even thousands of people within an organization. But and by the way, that's absolutely necessary because that's a different skill altogether if you want to do it well. But the people that lead 2, 3, 10, 20, 40 people, maybe early leaders, early managers, they're oftentimes like, oh, their teams are so small. They're not managing thousands of people. They should, they've got the right stuff. They'll figure it out. And that is absolutely where bad leadership kind of festers. And these unhelpful behaviors kind of fester is in lack of the preparing our new leaders on how to lead. You're kind of creating this a veneer of, you know, toxicity, if you will. So I think that that's important. And the other thing is that should word. Leaders should be awesome. Because we recruit them and pay them all this money, they should be setting the right culture. And I think it really depends on you as an individual. And how will you regard when you hear that word should? It shouldn't be this way. It should be this and it should be like this. Certain people are like, yes, that's it. This should be the way that it is. I can't believe it's not. And then you stew in that discomfort and
Sure.
you stew in that, you dwell in that toxicity, if you will. There are other people that say things should be this way. They should have better leadership. Let me go figure out how I can make it happen. Because ultimately, what I want is to take my leader's job one day when they move on. Ultimately, what I want is to actually make myself more marketable. So when I make a move outside the organization, I'm going to get a senior role. So the question becomes, it's all about power. You are not powerless. So when you hear that word should, my recommendation would be the type of person that actually says, well, what can I do to take things into my hands and change things?
Want more from our conversations on the show? Subscribe to the Raw Notes newsletter. It's where I share top takeaways from our guests, the resources that fuel their success, and my personal insights on how we as leaders can be more human. And we need more human. Go to relationshipsatworkshow.com and sign up today to keep your leadership journey on the right path.
And I think making assumptions never works. I just wrote in my newsletter about the frustration between performative versus performance. In the fact that there was this one person I talked to ages ago who was demanding their executive be a leader. And for 2 years thought they might be a leader. I'm like, just because they're an executive doesn't mean they're a leader. They've been rewarded for years for never having to be a leader. They've been a very successful manager. So stop thinking they are what they aren't. You're not going to let them, you're not going to influence them to be now because they haven't needed to be. Leave the job. Like it's almost to a point where you have to self-assess and know what you're willing to put up with, what you're not willing to put up with, figuring out what your boundaries are. And to your point, how actionable is that? But you need the self-assessment of yourself, of what you're able to or want to put yourself through. Because when we talk at the top about mental health, you're bringing that home. There is no escape from this. If you are spending 8, 9, 10 hours a day in this world that is horrible, and you're having to manage a boss that is not a leader, then you're taking it out on your partner. You're taking it out on your kids. You're taking it out on your mental health. So really understanding, I think, is so important. So I guess leads me to the next question was, how do we self-assess? How do we get to, because I often talk on the show that there's 3 bedrocks of every great leader: great self-awareness, great situational awareness, and communication. You have to have those 3 or you're not a leader, period. So how do you start down the path of self-assessment? Like what are the tangible things we need to be doing?
I think being a good observer is key. So in a situation where you're seeing good leadership and you're seeing what makes you feel a leader that brings you energy, and you know what it's like to actually have a strong leader, definitely observe and understand and infer, well, how can I actually take what this leader's doing? And then if I were in charge, what would I do? How could I take these techniques and actually make them interesting? Or how can I take these techniques and do things differently with my own teams? The second thing is when you are, kind of toiling underneath one of these archetypes that I write about, the biggest thing is to really try to separate the person from the behavior first. The second is to really try to understand the motivation. I would imagine if you go to any of these people that are exhibiting these bad tendencies, hey, would you prefer to impact your teams this way? The answer would be no. But underneath that is I don't really know what else to do. I don't have any other tools. Sure, I need a screwdriver, but all I have is hammers. And so I'm going to use hammers. So the third thing is once you understand and you could kind of empathize with the pressures that they're under, and I kind of did it at the top of our conversation. The emergency broadcaster manager is that way because they are just under enormous pressure. They have probably way too many direct reports, way too many messages, way too many things that they've taken on. And some of these are self-inflicted wounds and some of these are organizational inflicted wounds. But regardless, that is what's driving this undesirable behavior. Then you have to say, well, now that I empathize with them, maybe I can help them solve the problem, which is go to them and say, listen, this is impacting us negatively. I am here. I have suggestions, but what can I do to make it so that you don't have to schedule a 7:30 a.m. meeting, that you don't have to disrupt everybody's morning and degrade work-life experiences? Because I know it's happened to me. And if it's happening to me, it's happening to everybody else. How can we work together? What can I do to make this better? Here are some ideas.
How do you know your self-assessment is accurate or valuable?
Well, that's really where you have to practice self-awareness. And self-awareness, the question is whether you're born with it, whether you develop it, whether it can be taught. It's like leadership. Can leadership be taught? Maybe, maybe not. There are leadership courses. But at the same time, the question is always try to look at yourself from an outside in perspective. How am I? And we do this as human beings, right? Like part of our identity is what you think about yourself versus what other people think about you. And eventually there's some kind of balance to the point where somebody comes out of left field and says, "You're a horrible person." You might be able to like, "Hey, no, I'm not." Or, "Hey, maybe I am because I've got other people telling me I'm horrible." Right. So if you take that same skill that most humans have, you try to apply that to your work identity, which by the way, your work identity should be separate from your personal identity. It's part of who we are, but it's a lesson that I learned early on. It was amazing how much my personal identity was wrapped up in my work. So that was some work that I had to do to kind of separate those two things. But assessing your professional identity is a combination of formalized reviews and things that you get when you do your mid-year, your quarterly, or your year-end reviews, but also what people are saying about you and what the results you're capable of delivering. So it's a constant stream of looking at yourself and looking at others and what they think of you.
I want to go back to that point you made about basically severance of identity between home and work, because I've heard a lot of conversations where that's not what you should be doing, because you're not technically bringing yourself to work. You're bringing a version of you to work. You're keeping a version of you at home. And like, so for instance, I remember doing an exercise with a group around, it's one of those regular values exercises we always did.
Mhm.
But there was this one woman who did a values exercise, and her values at home were different than her values at work, which makes no sense because suddenly her family doesn't matter when she walks through the door or turns on her
Mhm.
computer. So I'm just kind of curious as to why that was an approach that worked for you, considering I've kind of heard or felt that it might be different.
Yeah, the way I think about it is like it's layers, and this is what I try to
Okay.
tell my kids. So family is at the bottom; it's the most important thing. Then it's school for
Foundational, not at
kids.
the
Yeah,
bottom. It's
foundational.
foundational. There's a
Yeah, you're
difference.
right. You see, I'm still
At
on
the
my own
bottom, it's
journey, Russell. I'm still on my own journey. But family is foundational. Then it's for kids, it's like school. Then it's commitments like sports. Then it's their jobs. Then it's fun, and then it's everything else on top of that. The way I think about my own life is very similar. It's family is the most important thing, and then you have your profession, which sits on top of that. It's built on top of family. The professional identity should never kind of just encompass and become like could subsume your family, where family is secondary. If you have commitments to family, you have to balance that with work. And people hate this term, I think, and maybe people groan when I say it, but work life balance, it is a real thing, and it's something that you have to choose, and you have to keep choosing it almost every day. Sometimes you're going to be out of balance, but the other times you have to get back into balance. But once your professional identity becomes your identity, your source of worth in this world, if your source of worth is like I'm bringing in a paycheck and that paycheck helps me, provide opportunities to my family and my children, it's very easy to fall downhill and be like, well, now the whole reason I exist is to work, and I better do a good job at work. And now that my family life is secondary.
right.
I found it to be a very, very rewarding and healthy mental exercise for me to be like, my worth, even though I love what I do, it's a job to help me in my life versus who I am. And I think that's I found it for me to be a healthier way to look at the world.
And maybe I misunderstood, because it sounds like you're talking about boundaries to a lot of what, not that you become a different person there versus at home. It's that you are separating church and state and going, this is me over here. I'm still the same person on both sides,
That's right.
but I have for my own mental health, for my own mental ability to focus, I need to have a bit of not separation, but just more of a boundary side of things.
In fact, one of the coping strategies that I talk about for dealing with the emergency broadcaster in the book is um, dealing with FOMO, which is the
Mm.
fear of missing out, which is why so many Americans work on their vacations because, hey, there could be that one thing, that one opportunity, this one thing that's blowing up. And I'm sitting here on a cruise, sunning myself, but these things are happening and I'm not aware of them. I gotta take my work phone with me. I gotta look and see what's happening. The 7:30 a.m. meeting, at the top of our discussion, I joined because what if they assign me something? What if I get called out for not doing something? What if I just miss an opportunity? And setting those boundaries to say, no, I will catch up. I will listen to the recording. I'll feed it to a generative AI agent that looks for my name, and asks whether or not I was exposed or if I have any opportunities. I will connect with my manager one on one later in the day, but I'm teaching my manager how to manage me by saying that I'm not going to be on these 7:30 a.m. calls. I'm dropping the kids off, or in transit. And I'd rather sit down and focus on what you're telling me rather than try to give you half my attention while I'm trying to balance my life.
And to be fair, as a Canadian, you Americans don't get a lot of vacation time. So it is, or Europeans get tons more than
That's
both of
right.
us combined. But it really goes back to that boundary, is that if you don't have that time to disconnect from work, which again, depending on where you live in the world, is
Mhm.
quite different. So you feel more tied, I can imagine, to the workplace when you're not allowed to give the space to move away from it with time. And
It can be quite parasitic. You got
yeah,
it.
oh,
It'll
absolutely.
it kind of crawls under your skin and it becomes kind of like this drumbeat in your head, like what's going on there? You got to monitor it just to keep it under control.
Is taking a vacation a career limiting move? Like, are you like that's the world you live in? That shows a lot of, I mean, that is such a beautiful example of a dysfunctional workplace. If you think you feel that way, that means you're working in a dysfunctional workplace. So I want
That's
to pull
right.
it back a bit from self, because self can also be a team. You're responsible for a team. You're responsible for a team of 10, 20, 50, but your direct reports are obviously not all that.
Mhm.
What, how do you self-assess from a team lens when it comes to a dysfunctional workplace? So we've done the work as leaders, but we have to, it's important to probably bring our team with us
Mhm.
to self-assess on the team level. How do we go down that path?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can speak from my own experience and what I learned from leaders that I had an opportunity to spend time with. It was servant leadership really is, again, people might groan when they hear that term, but what it really means to me is the ability for you to say, listen, my job is to get you promoted. My job is to help you do great things. My job is to be the shoulders you stand on to be great. And by the way, by being great, the outcome for me is that people recognize that people want to work for me and new leadership opportunities open up for me. So for some folks that might be groaning out there right now, it sounds too good to be true. It might be sound like some kind of crazy pyramid scheme, but it's not. It actually is a great way to lead. Many organizations now are turning to what they call pulse surveys, which
Mhm.
factor into your compensation and your promotability as a leader. How does your team feel about you? They basically go through and answer anywhere from 25 to 40 questions on the culture. Do they feel recognized? Do they feel energized? Do they feel that your team or the organization is on the right track? That you provide them with opportunities? By the way, these are real questions because I've just went through this. So all
But
of these
that's not a
types of
pulse
questions.
survey. That's a survey. A pulse survey is like 5 questions, 2 questions. Like, from what is, pulse is supposed to be quick. That's what a
Yeah,
pulse is.
they're often not. They're often not. They call it the pulse survey, Russell,
They're
but it's
not.
really not.
I'm not saying it's not
Because
important information. I'm like, you're labeling it wrong. That's
yeah,
all.
yes, but maybe that's intentional. Pulse
Eh,
survey. Hey, once we
lie to
get
your
you
staff,
in,
sure.
what?
This will
Well,
only take
I'll
5 seconds.
tell you. I can tell you the most difficult thing is getting people to fill it out. So
Mm.
whatever techniques that they're trying to use to get people to do it, maybe it's working, maybe it's not. Because I usually have to tin cup. Please answer the survey.
Don't make it
Um,
40 questions. People will answer it if it's not 40 freaking questions.
do it more frequently, like a
Yeah.
pulse. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic idea. So, but it's ultimately a good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the goal is how, and again, people are incented by the reward system. So having a stellar pulse survey as a leader means that you are empirically a good leader. Now, you can argue that, but that's the way that the organization will interpret those results. And
Right.
so I think the original question was, how do you develop that self-awareness as a leader, how you're doing? To me, I oftentimes think about if I'm talking to at a skip level, one of my managers, team members are chatting with me, and I try to spend time with everybody equally on a monthly basis. Um, how would they answer the pulse survey after I engage with them? How would they rate working on the team? And if I don't know the answer to those questions, I ask. I say, as a servant leader, what can I do to help your visibility? What can I do to provide you with new opportunities that not only are going to be great from a career perspective, but you actually want to do, that you want to work on? How much of your time here is spent working on things that you hate versus things that you love? And if that balances off, what can I do to support it? So it's all about like re-recruiting people every time you talk to them. And the way you re-recruit is you try to make them feel that you're there to support them. And it's not order take. It's not to be subservient. It's not to, that's why they call this work and not fun. We're going to have to do things that take away our energy, but the goal is to do more things that give energy. And I constantly ask for that.
How do you have a meaningful conversation with people that don't see the dysfunction or benefit from it?
The people that don't see the dysfunction are typically people that feel comfortable in terms of the rewards and the incentive systems that they're experiencing. So if your work is part of a dysfunctional team, part of what I experienced is even in this last role that I had was looking around and saying, is anybody else experiencing this, or do they see it and that they're just swallowing it like I am? And then you begin this process of exploration in which you're gently probing, how honest can I be with you as a peer of mine to tell you, to say, hey, this is not okay. And sometimes you might get this impermeable, yeah, but that's the way it's always been. And, things are pretty good. They might not say that, but that's the attitude that you might get, in which case you pull back and then you just go to the other peer and say, does this really make sense to you? Because I imagine some people might find this frustrating. So you're being gently probing, and if they respond, "Oh my gosh, this is hugely frustrating. Can you believe they did this?" You develop this. Certainly you commiserate. It's group empathy, maybe unofficial therapy in some ways. I know it was for me. But once you develop this kind of shared consciousness, you kind of understand that, hey, there's a person over there that really is thriving in this dysfunction. They are getting bonuses. They are the favorite of the leader. And so it's outside of their scope to say that, hey, I want to change things. Potentially. Some instances they might be like, yes, this is dysfunctional, even though I am, kind of okay. I don't want the rest of the team to be this way. And so I'm going to work with you to kind of change things. So I think that those are kind of the, incentive drives behavior. The other element is looking up. So, as a manager who is exhibiting and creating this, culture of strife and dysfunction, are you still delivering results? And if you're still delivering results and your pulse surveys are not in the toilet, then I'm just going to leave well enough alone because I have other leaders to worry about, other things to do. And so, it becomes a, don't ask, don't tell scenario in many instances.
I often talk about the missing middle, which you kind of brought up there, which is leaders generally either have to work with the 20% that are the rock stars or the 20% that
Yes.
are the problems. So guess who gets ignored? The 60% in the middle.
That's right.
So we can self-assess a team and go, okay, you're fine. Good. Moving on. Even fine is not enough. You've assessed the situation. Great. But you're not leading. You're
Hmm.
managing. You're managing a resource as opposed to helping somebody grow. So I can see self-assessment being an unbelievably powerful tool as a leader when self-assessing a team is what I mean.
Right.
So you can support them in the way that you need to as a leader, because I think it's a missed opportunity a lot of the times is where they just look at, oh, great, you're not adding to my workload. I don't have to worry about you.
Right.
Moving on. Or
Right.
you're not the person that I can delegate work to help me out. It becomes a
Hmm.
narcissism exercise as opposed to here's a great opportunity to help the team grow.
Yeah. There's a fallacy, I think a leadership fallacy. It's called the rock star phenomenon. And I just invented that, by the way. It doesn't exist out there anywhere. At least not that I know of. But the rock star phenomenon is if I have an unbelievable team of standout people that are heroes in their own rights. They come from heroic backgrounds, they do heroic things, they stay up 24 hours, they produce slide decks at the last minute. They're fantastic in front of they're fantastic speakers, orators, they drive incredible results. Well, if I had a team of those people, then wow, what can I accomplish? That fallacy is one in which you're like, hey, I don't want to spend that 80% of my time with the people that are not performing fantastic. I want to spend most of my time with the people that are fantastic. And maybe wouldn't it be great if there were no middle, like everyone was fantastic. I did that, by the way, at Microsoft, and it was one of the most educational professional experiences I've ever had, in that I had a team of people that talked like me, thought like me, had my same experiences, but Russell, we all had the same blind spots. So in essence, we were like, hey, there's a fire over there burning in the corner. And we were all like, yeah, somebody else will get that. I'm going to go out here and do some whiteboarding and some brilliant technology stuff. And, somebody else will figure out how to report out on our results for the quarter. That didn't turn out so well. But the way I think about this, to kind of wrap up my observation here, is you constantly have to be re-recruiting your team. So the question is, if they were to leave, they're constantly being recruited. We're all constantly being pulled in different directions, whether it's internally or externally. If they were to leave, how big a hole would they leave? How big a hole would you have to kind of just stretch other people to fill in? And think about it from that perspective. If you're talking to each person that's on your team and they're valuable, how can you re-recruit them? How can you continually get them to stay? That's kind of the way I think about it.
I like that a lot. I was a little worried there for a minute. You're like, because you're just you're re-recruiting new people and you're just
Oh,
replacing
no.
them. We're not, but no, good swerve. I followed you to the end. I'm like, okay, no,
That's it.
I love that because we always treat onboarding like this amazing magical thing, but all
Mhm.
we do is treat somebody like they're amazing for 3 days and then ignore them until they leave. Right?
Right.
It's this singular experience of promise that we never follow up with until they leave and they're like, why did you leave? What could we have done differently? When it should be a journey. And to your
That's
point,
right.
that's exactly what you're explaining, which is how can we re-engage? How can we motivate? And that comes from self-assessment. Like
Mhm.
I love the point you had about blind spots because we all had the same. That's where diversity comes in.
Yes.
That's where innovation comes in because you have diversity of thought, which is
Mhm.
fueled by diversity of backgrounds, diversity
Right.
of upbringings, diversity of geography.
Mhm.
And we can't know any of that without some sort of self-assessment and understanding how the pieces fit together and how the humans work with the other humans.
You
So
got it.
really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, and
So
thanks for calling that out. Just to be clear, it's re-recruiting the people you have,
yes, yes, thank you.
not farming new people and getting new people in the org.
Super worried there for a minute, Eric. Super worried. Um, what if the culture doesn't get it? Like you're doing the work, you're doing your fake pulse surveys, you're doing your but surveys. We'll just say surveys
Mhm.
because that just drives me nuts. They're calling them pulse surveys. So you're doing surveys to get to know your people, you're self-assessing, but you're still working in dysfunction. There are so many things outside of your culture, your immediate subculture, that can impact you. Toxic bosses,
Mhm.
unrealistic expectations. How do you keep safe while still being connected and collaborative? Because you can't be an island. You still
Mhm.
have to work with all these people that may have different perspectives of what dysfunction and not dysfunction is. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a really interesting word you use there is how do you or the phrase, "How do you keep safe?" If I think back, I may have even said this earlier. Leaders do a couple things. They, allocate resources, but they establish and grow culture. So if you take that to heart and you believe that leaders establish culture, every executive, every leader actually has the responsibility to say, this is how we are going to behave when no one's looking, which is my definition of what culture is. Culture is what do you do when no one's watching you because you have a system of shared beliefs. If you buy that and leaders establish culture, then you have to say, well, what kind of culture am I creating on my team? And is this culture beneficial? Have I delivered great results? Do people love it? What's the churn rate? What's my survey results? And if I've got something here that's positive, let me go out and talk to the other organizations and other teams about how I achieve this. And here's what I think we can do to change things. And safety is important because nobody wants to be out on the street. But at the same time, you kind of have to have a little bit of courage as a leader to fulfill that element of establishing culture, which means that if you observe a team that is not thriving in the same way that your team is, you can actually go to that leader and say, "Hey, I've heard from some folks on your team, and I'm assuming you might want to know this. It actually happened to me last week that onboarding was rough, or they're wondering if they made the right employment decision, or they are constantly thinking about leaving the organization. Here's some ways that I dealt with this, or my team deals with this, or my managers deal with this, and it works out really well." So that's a way that you can kind of intangibly influence culture by looking after staying safe. But it is a leadership responsibility to establish culture, in my opinion.
I like that you're trying to pick away at scale. Like, how can we take what we're doing? How can we take this self-assessment and grow it?
Yeah.
Because a lot of leaders won't get it because they're like, I see what they're doing, but I guess it's working for them, whatever they're doing. But I'm going to do what I do over here because that's my silo, and I like my
Mhm.
silo because that's how I'm comfortable working. I think
Mhm.
I think it's important to understand that when we do self-assessments, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on this, what if we find things we don't like? Like, we're doing a lot of self-assessment here of like, well, I'm this and I'm that and I'm this, I'm that, but I'm also sucky at this. Maybe I'm a horrible leader. Like there's and maybe I'm perpetuating these cultures, the dysfunction. What do
Mhm.
we do with that information?
Well, I think that arriving at that realization is an achievement in and of itself,
Mm.
because we are wired, especially as leaders. It's almost like they strapped us to a rocket ship and there's only one way to go: bust or achieve orbit, right? Like, so the ability for you to realize that, hey, you know what, even though I'm trying to get escape velocity, I need to make a course correction is super important, right? To continue the rocket analogy. So I think that having people that have those thoughts, I think that when you do recognize those things, congratulate yourself for the level of self awareness that you've achieved. The second question is sit with it for a while. Don't try to solve it immediately. Don't become tactical. Just sit with it and say that, well, if I were working for me, what I would love to do is this, or maybe even go out and gather feedback from your team and say, hey, one of the things I was thinking about is my fear is that this is what's happening in the team. What's your perspective? How and have you seen this behavior? And what would be a great way for us to work together to change it? There's this, I think American culture and American corporate culture, we pretend that we don't like hierarchies. Everybody from an EVP
Love
to
'em.
the CEO, call me Bob, call me Eric. This is my boss. We work together, right? So we like to self deprecate in terms of hierarchy, but we believe it in our hearts, right? I'm in charge. I must know best because I was put here. I can't have somebody else who's three levels beneath me telling me how to lead. And while so it's a interesting American dichotomy culturally. We hate a hierarchy, but at the same time, it lives deep within us. And so I think what we have to do is to be servant leaders and say, what do you think? Help me become a better leader. Help our team become better. And it certainly takes a level of humility and eschewing that ingrained corporate hierarchy. That's what's important.
Do you feel ego is the biggest roadblock for cultures to be able to adopt this?
I think so. And maybe it's ego, and to say that, hey, I can't be wrong. Can't like you said earlier, like, why do leaders believe that they're not part of the problem? It's because the organization has voted for me. I can't not believe that I'm part of the problem, because maybe if I start believing that, then everything else comes undone. Right. And so I think that there's got to be an element of ego, but there's also got to be an element of humility. So just like, most people I would hope are not egomaniacs, there are some out there, but folks have to balance, like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, but here's the things I'm probably not great at. And I will take help from wherever. I am not ashamed or embarrassed to take help from somebody who might have just finished their undergrad and started last week.
I did a presentation not so long ago to a group of executives, and I brought some hard truths to the room that some people took personally. It had nothing to do with them, but I'm like, maybe it has a lot to do with you based on how you're reacting.
Hmm.
But the reason I bring this story up is that there was one executive, she stood up at the end. You could tell she had a little bit more influence and power than most people in the room.
Hmm.
But she stood up and she goes, your presentation made me unbelievably uncomfortable. And I'm curious as to why, and I have to sit with that for a while. I
Yep.
thought that was the most powerful statement that she could have said in that vulnerable moment
Hmm.
where she's feeling it, but she also is sitting in the discomfort,
Right.
as opposed to it's my safe space
Hmm.
and I don't want to hear anything bad. I don't want to ever be challenged. I don't want to open myself to self-assessment. And I
Right.
think that's a step that we have to take is you have to be open to self-assessment before you can even do it. It's not a checkbox exercise. You have to be willing to be okay with warts and unicorns and all the good, all the bad at once. So that really hit home for me. And I've used that story a few times where I'm just sort of like, wow, thank you for being so vulnerable in a group of your peers.
I think that um, in that moment, she displayed an unimaginable amount of courage, but also um, leadership that needs to be emulated. And
Yeah.
I know we've been talking a lot about the negatives and the challenges, but I have seen in my travels most recently an ability for the proliferation of this servant leadership to actually take hold in many organizations, and to have leaders in EVP, MVP, SVP, or C level ranks that are doing things exactly like that example you brought. So there has been a title change or sea change or whatever you want to call it in how leaders are adopting that servant leadership. There's also leaders who are not doing that in organizations where that's not the culture. So I do want to kind of tell folks out there that there is hope. Find the right organization that's worth your talent. Know your worth in order to do that, and seek the right places that bring you energy in the ways outlined by the perfect example you brought up. And that to me is aspirational for a lot of people. In that scenario, leaders, maybe underneath that person that gave you that feedback are saying, wow, that is what leadership is. That is a tool I need in my toolbox. And that's happening.
Maybe it sounded negative because we were talking about self-assessment in a dysfunctional workplace,
Right.
but I think to your point, self-assessment is the path to positivity
Hmm.
because you're arming yourself with the information of strengths, but also things you need to work on and that could be perceiving you as a leader that you don't want to be, so you can correct. I think it's a very positive thing because you could be modeling the behavior to help get out of this leadership ecosystem problem, dysfunctional workplace. So I want to echo your positivity. Derek, I don't think we've been completely positive. We're trying here.
Good. Yeah. And like I said, it all goes back to me to the growth mindset book. Whether or not you're a fixed mindset and you believe that you're infallible, or you're a growth mindset in which you embrace failure and you learn and you do it with humility. I love the latter.
So to wrap it up, what is something anybody listening right now can do that takes that first step into self-assessment? Is it taking an online survey? Is it asking around? Like, what would you recommend? Just like tomorrow, what could they do to start that path of, I guess, self-discovery almost?
Yeah, I would say that there is a host of tools, capabilities, some for free, some you pay for. Definitely get engaged with those. Keep keep an eye on your own mental health, whether it's just choosing happiness each day, having a positive mental attitude, reframing your reality, or engaging in clinical therapy. All things that we need to look after. So if I set those things aside, I would say the first thing you can do is to try to say, hey, what am I worth? Am I, is it me? Do I feel like I am deficient in some way? Or kind of give yourself a 360 assessment. Sometimes the need for self assessment and realizing that you should do it is the path to kind of gaining this new level of awareness. And then utilizing all the tools and capabilities that you have, clinical, non-clinical, free, or that you pay for, courses or coursework. That's super important. Most organizations also have a 360 assessment that you can do at any point in time. That's super important. And just being prepared to be uncomfortable, I think, is the next thing that people really need to kind of embrace. But to me, it is, you should kind of take pride in the fact that you've arrived at the point where you realize that I need to self assess in order for things to get better.
And I don't care where you are in the organization. You
That's right.
absolutely can still I don't care if you're the CEO or frontline staff, you can always self-assess.
Absolutely.
That is Eric Charran. He's an author, speaker, executive director, and head of product for Data Intuit. Intuit. He's also the founder and CEO of Vulcan Collective, and he's got a book. He's got a book you should definitely check out. There's some archetypes in there that we may want to be avoiding as a boss. Have you ever had a boss that ... question mark succeeding in a dysfunctional workplace? Thank you so much for being here, Eric.
Russell, thanks for having me. It's been great.
And that brings us to a close with yet another episode of Relationships at Work, your leadership guide, helping you build workplace connection, improve culture, and avoid those blind spots. I'm Russell. Thanks so much again for joining us. However you listen, whether you're going for a walk, going for a run, listening in your car, maybe you're taking a moment while you're working and like that noise in the background of a podcast. I'm not that person. I always get distracted when I have other things to listen to while I'm working, but I know so many people feel like they can focus more when they've got that extra stimuli. I'm not them, but I see you. I understand you. But needless to say, I appreciate your time and your effort in trying to be a better leader. If you enjoy these podcasts, fantastic. We do them twice a week. Today is our guest day, and then every Thursday I do a solo episode that's about under 10 minutes, just quick little mind shifts to help you for weeks ahead. So if you like guest episodes, I really think you're going to enjoy the solo episodes as well, because they kind of a nice balance for each other. One's digging into an expert's expertise, and the other one is digging into my expertise. Needless to say, I think as leaders, it's always about learning and growing and finding as many resources and to help us on that journey. So I'm going to leave it there, as I usually do, and look forward to talking to you again later in the week. Take care.